O you unfortunate worshipper of causes and nature! Since the nature of each thing, like all things, is created, for it is full of art, and is being constantly renewed, and, like the effect, the apparent cause of each thing is also created, and since for each thing to exist, there is need for much equipment and many tools, there must exist a possessor of absolute power who creates the nature and brings the cause into existence. And that absolutely powerful one is in no need of impotent intermediaries to share in his dominicality and creation. Allah forbid! He creates cause and effect together directly. In order to demonstrate his wisdom and the manifestation of his names, by establishing an apparent causal relationship and connection through order and sequence, he makes causes and nature avail to the hand of his power, so that the apparent faults, severities, and defects in things should be ascribed to them, and in this way his dignity be preserved. Is it easier for a watchmaker to make the cogwheels of a clock and then arrange them and put them in order to form the clock? Or is it easier for him to make a wonderful machine in each of the cogwheels and then leave the making of the clock to the lifeless hands of those machines? Is that not beyond the bounds of possibility? Come on, you judge with your unfair reason and say. And is it easier for a scribe to collect ink, pen, and paper, and then using them proceed to write out a book himself? Or is it easier for him to create in the paper, pen, and ink a writing machine that requires more art and trouble than the book, and can be used only for that book, and then say to the unconscious machine, "Come on, you write it," and himself not interfere? Is that not 100 times more difficult than writing it himself? If you say, yes, it is 100 times more difficult to create a machine that writes a book rather than writing it out oneself, but is it not in a way easier, because the machine is the means for producing numerous copies of the same book? The answer: through his limitless power, the pre-eternal inscriber continuously renews the infinite manifestations of his names so as to display them in ever-differing ways. And through this constant renewal, he creates the identities and special features in things in such a manner that no missive of the eternally besought one or dominical book can be the same as any other book. In any case, each will have different features in order to express different meanings. If you have eyes, look at the human face. You will see that from the time of Adam until today, indeed, until post-eternity, together with the conformity of their essential organs, each face has a distinguishing mark in relation to all other faces. This is a definite fact. Therefore, each face may be thought of as a different book. Only for the artwork to be set out, different writing sets, arrangements, and compositions are required. And in order to both collect and situate the materials, and to include everything necessary for the existence of each, a completely different workshop will be required. Now, knowing it to be impossible, we thought of nature as a printing press. But apart from the composition and printing which concern the printing press, that is, setting up the type in a specific order, the substances that form an animate being's body, the creation of which is 100 times more difficult than that of the composition and ordering, must be created in specific proportions and particular order, brought from the furthest corners of the cosmos, and placed in the hands of the printing press. But in order to do all these things, there is still need for the power and will of the absolutely powerful one, who creates the printing press. That is to say, this hypothesis of the printing press is a totally meaningless superstition. Thus, like these comparisons of the clock and the book, the all-glorious Maker, who is powerful over all things, has created causes, and so too does he create the effects. Through his wisdom, he ties the effect to the cause. Through his will, he has determined a manifestation of the greater Sharia, the Sharia of creation, which consists of the divine laws concerning the ordering of all motion in the universe, and determine the nature of beings, which is only to be a mirror to that manifestation in things, and to be a reflection of it. And through his power he has created the face of that nature, which has received external existence, and has created things on that nature, and has mixed them one with the other. Is it easier to accept this fact, which is the conclusion of innumerable most rational proofs? In fact, is one not compelled to accept it? Or is it easier to get the physical beings that you call causes and nature, which are lifeless, unconscious, created, fashioned, and simple, to provide the numberless tools and equipment necessary for the existence of each thing, and to carry out those matters, which are performed wisely and discerningly? Is that not utterly beyond the bounds of possibility? We leave it to you to decide with your unreasonable mind. The unbelieving nature worshipper replied, "Since you are asking me to be fair and reasonable, I have to confess that the mistaken way I have followed up to now is both a compounded impossibility and extremely harmful and ugly. Anyone with even a grain of consciousness would understand from your analyses above that to attribute the act of creation to causes and nature is precluded and impossible, and that to attribute all things directly to the necessarily existent one is imperative and necessary. I say, all praise be to Allah for belief, and I believe in Him. Only I do have one doubt. I believe that Almighty Allah is the Creator, but what harm does it do to the sovereignty of His dominicality if some minor causes have a hand in the creation of insignificant matters and thereby gain for themselves a little praise and acclaim? Does it diminish His sovereignty in some way? The answer: as we have conclusively proved in other parts of the Risale-i Nur, the mark of rulership is that it rejects interference. The most insignificant ruler or official will not tolerate the interference of his own son even within the sphere of his rule. The fact that, despite being caliph, certain devout sultans had their innocent sons murdered on the unfounded apprehension that the sons would interfere in their rule demonstrates how fundamental is this law of rejection of interference in rulership, and the law of prevention of participation, which the independence intrinsic to rulership necessitates, has shown its strength in the history of mankind through extraordinary upheavals whenever there have been two governors in a town or two kings in a country. Thus, if the sense of rulership and sovereignty, which is a mere shadow in human beings who are impotent and in need of assistance, rejects interference to this degree, prevents the intervention of others, does not accept participation in its sovereignty, and seeks to preserve the independence of its position so jealously, then, if you can, compare this with an all-glorious one whose absolute sovereignty is at the degree of dominicality, whose absolute rulership at the degree of divinity, absolute independence at the degree of oneness, and absolute lack of need at the degree of absolute power, and understand what a necessary requirement and inevitable necessity of that rulership is this rejection of interference, prevention of participation, and repulsion of partners. Concerning the second part of your doubt, you said, if some of the worship of some insignificant beings is directed towards certain causes, what deficiency does this cause to the worship of all beings from particles to planets, which is directed towards the necessarily existent one, the absolute object of all worship? The answer: the all-wise creator of the universe made the universe like a tree with conscious beings as its most perfect fruit, and among conscious beings he made man its most comprehensive fruit. And man's most important fruit, indeed, the result of his creation, the aim of his nature, and the fruit of his life are his thanks and worship. Would that absolutely sovereign and independent ruler, that single one of unity, who creates the universe in order to make himself known and loved, give away to others man, the fruit of the whole universe, and man's thanks and worship, his most elevated fruit? Totally contrary to his wisdom, would he make vain and futile the result of creation and fruit of the universe? Allah forbid. Would he be content to give away the worship of creatures to others in a way that would deny his wisdom and his dominicality? And although he demonstrates through his actions that he wishes to make himself known and loved to an unlimited degree, would he cause his most perfect creatures to forget him by handing over to causes their thanks and gratitude, love and worship, and cause them to deny the exalted purposes in the universe? O friend who has given up the worship of nature, now it is for you to say. To which he replied, all praise be to Allah, these two doubts of mine have now been resolved. And your two proofs concerning divine unity, which demonstrate that the only true object of worship is He, and that nothing other than He is worthy of worship, are so brilliant and powerful that to deny them would require as much arrogance as to deny the sun and the day. Conclusion. The person who gave up atheistic naturalism and came to believe said, all praise be to Allah, I no longer have any doubts, but there are still a few questions about which I am curious. First question. We hear many lazy people and those who neglect the 5 daily prayers ask, what need has Allah Almighty of our worship, that in the Quran He severely and insistently reproves those who give up worship and threatens them with such a fearsome punishment as hell? How is it in keeping with the style of the Quran, which is moderate, mild, and fair, to demonstrate the ultimate severity towards an insignificant minor fault? The answer: Allah Almighty has no need of your worship, nor indeed of anything else. It is you who needs to worship. For in truth you are sick. As we have proved in many parts of the Risale-i, worship is a sort of remedy for your spiritual wounds. If someone who is ill responds to a compassionate doctor who insists on his taking medicines that are beneficial for his condition by saying, what need do you have of it that you are insisting in this way? You can understand how absurd it would be. As for the severe threats and fearsome punishments in the Quran concerning the giving up of worship, they may be likened to a king who, in order to protect his subjects' rights, inflicts a severe punishment on an ordinary man in accordance with the degree that his crime infringes those rights. In the same way, the man who gives up worship and ritual prayer is violating in a significant manner the rights of beings who are like the subjects of the monarch of pre-eternity and post-eternity, and is in fact acting unjustly towards them. For the perfections of beings are manifested through the glorification and worship performed by that aspect of them which is directed towards their Maker. The one who abandons worship does not and cannot see this worship. Indeed, he denies it. Furthermore, beings occupy an exalted position by reason of their worship and glorification, and each is a missive of the eternally besought one and a mirror to the names of its sustainer. Since he reduces them from their high positions and considers them to be unimportant, lifeless, aimless, and without duties, he is insulting them and denying and transgressing their perfections. Indeed, everyone sees the world in his own mirror. Allah Almighty created man as a measure and scale for the universe, and from the world He gave a particular world to each person. This world He colors for him in accordance with his sincere beliefs. For example, a despairing, lamenting, weeping person sees beings as weeping and in despair, while a cheerful, optimistic, merry person sees the universe as joyful and smiling. A reflective man given to solemn worship and glorification, discovers and sees to a degree the certain, truly existent worship and glorification of beings, while a person who abandons worship through either neglect or denial sees beings in a manner totally contrary and opposed to the reality of their perfections, thus transgressing their rights. Furthermore, since the one who gives up prayer does not own himself, he wrongs his own soul, which is a slave of its true owner. His owner delivers awesome threats in order to protect his slave's rights from his evil commanding soul. Also, since he has given up worship, which is the result of his creation and the aim of his nature, it is like an act of aggression against divine wisdom and dominical will, and he therefore receives punishment. In short, the abandoner of worship both wrongs his own soul, which is the slave and totally owned property of Almighty Allah, and wrongs and transgresses the rights of the perfections of the universe. Certainly, just as unbelief is an insult to beings, so is the abandonment of worship a denial of the universe's perfections. And since it is an act of aggression against divine wisdom, it is deserving of awesome threats and severe punishment. Thus, it is to express this deservedness and the above facts that the Quran of miraculous exposition chooses in a miraculous way that severe style, which, in complete conformity with the principles of eloquence, corresponds to the requirements of the situation.